let's see how things are now. Yeah, I know, yeah. I stopped the stream again. I did nothing. I'm glad it's better. I did nothing. I just shut out Soundflower and then started that up again. I'm glad it's better though. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna do a virus scan after I finish. That's really weird. Can you guys try reloading? Hello? Can you see me again? The stress, the lights, it's so warm. Cool. And what I was saying before is that I'm wearing this Halloween-y dress because it's kind of summery too, and it's like 81 degrees outside, so I figured... Hold on. Hold your horses. I figured that I would wear it because it's probably one of the last warmer days of the year. Yeah. So, thank you. I'll show you guys the dress in just a second. Honestly, this is like, just a little bit of this is taking a lot out of me. I might have to run off for a second to go to the little girl's room, and come back, for us to start properly. But let me show you the dress first. Let me take out my headphones. Bathroom break for everybody? Hold on, let me get the... So... Oh, thank you. I don't know why I'm putting my headphones back on. I'm going to be running... No, not Hot Topic. Hell Bunny. I got it a couple years ago. Yeah. Good dresses there. Nice dresses. Expensive dresses, but nice. Nope. Got it quite a while ago. Yeah, I'm gonna just run for a second. So if you don't mind sitting here in some silence, I'd like to put up, like, again, I keep forgetting that I have to have, what's it called? Like a little placeholder screen that I wanted to do. I keep forgetting about that. But just use your imagination for now. Like, imagine a cute little bunny, maybe dancing around. Like, I don't know, with maracas or something. I will be right back. Yeah, exactly. Well, I was gonna actually turn off my screen, so you won't have Nageki, but... Actually, I'll leave it on. What's the problem? I'll leave it on. You can sit here with Nageki and, enjoy that time. Contemplate, talk with Nageki. And, yeah, I will be right back. Reminisce about old times. Why clown face? Alright guys, well, I'm back. Let me grab the book and we can go ahead and get started. Thank you. Eek. Alright, well now after a slew of unfortunate tech difficulties and stuff, let's get the show on the road. I'm going to take some water to start us off. Everybody make sure to hydrate. My throat is a little scratchy because of like sinus headache. I don't really have much of a sinus headache today, but I feel like what's it called? I feel like the atmospheric stuff is off. Like it's really prompting sinus symptoms. Don't know why. But so I feel a little like today. I should still be okay to read though. That shouldn't be a problem. Of course, obviously, if anything comes up, I'll let you guys know. But we should be fine. We are starting today on chapter 4, which is The Witch's Headstone. And yes, it was a series of unfortunate events. Oh, I get it. Yeah, the clown would be the picture that you're thinking of. Don't think about clowns. Clowns aren't nice. Okay. There was a witch buried at the edge of the graveyard. It was common knowledge. Bod had been told to keep away from that corner of the world by Mrs. Owens as far back as he could remember. Why? He asked. "'Tain't healthy for a living body," said Mrs. Owens. "There's damp down that end of things. It's practically a marsh. You'll catch your death." Mr. Owens himself was more evasive and less imaginative. "It's not a good place," was all he said. The graveyard proper ended at the bottom of the west side of the hill, beneath the old apple tree, with a fence of rust-brown iron railings, each topped with a small, rusting spearhead. But there was a wasteland beyond that, a mass of nettles and weeds, of brambles and autumnal rubbish, and Bod, who was, on the whole, obedient, did not push between the railings, but he went down there and looked through. He knew he wasn't being told the whole story, and it irritated him. Just to show you, there is an illustration on the other side of the page. I'm sure we'll find out exactly what that is soon. Bod went back up the hill to the little chapel near the entrance of the graveyard, and he waited until it got dark. As twilight edged from gray to purple, there was a noise in the spire, like a fluttering of heavy velvet, and Silas left his resting place in the belfry and clambered headfirst down the spire. "What's in the far corner of the graveyard?" asked Bod. Past Harrison Westwood, baker of this parish, and his wives, Marion and Joan." "Why do you ask?" said his guardian, brushing the dust from his black suit with ivory fingers. Bod shrugged. "Just wondering." "It's on consecrated ground," said Silas. "Do you know what that means?" "Not really," said Bod. Silas walked across the path without disturbing a fallen leaf, and sat down on the bench beside Bod. "There are those," he said in his sullen voice, "who believe that all land is sacred. That it is sacred before we come to it, and sacred after. But here, in your land, they bless the churches and set the ground they set aside to bury people in, to make it holy. But they left land unconsecrated beside the sacred ground, Potter's Fields, to bury the criminals at all. Wait, what? Aha! Sorry, my pages were stuck together. I see. To bury the criminals, and the suicides, or those who were not of the faith." And just to show you, there's more of the picture. "So, the people buried in the ground on the other side of the fence are bad people?" Silas raised one perfect eyebrow. "Hmm?" "Oh, not at all. Let's see, it's been a while since I've been down that way, but I don't remember anyone particularly evil. Remember, in days gone by, you could be hanged for stealing a shilling. And there are always people who find their lives have become so unsupportable they believe the best thing that they could do would be to hasten their transition to another plane of existence. They kill themselves, you mean? Said Bod. He was about 8 years old, wide-eyed and inquisitive, and he was not stupid. Indeed. Does it work? Are they happier dead? Sometimes. Mostly no. It's like the people who believe they'll be happy if they go and live somewhere else, but who learn it doesn't work that way. Wherever you go, you take yourself with you, if you see what I mean. Sort of, said Bod. Silas reached down and ruffled the boy's hair. Bod said, What about the witch? What about the witch? Yes, exactly, said Silas. Suicides, criminals, and witches, those who died unshriven. He stood up, a midnight shadow in the twilight. All this talking, he said, and I have not even had my breakfast. While you will be late for lessons. In the twilight of the graveyard there was a silent implosion, a flutter of velvet darkness, and Silas was gone. The moon had begun to rise by the time Bod reached Mr. Pennyworth's mausoleum, and Thomas Pennyworth, here he lies in the certainty of the moft glorious resurrection. Maybe I'm wondering if it was moft glorious. No. Moft glorious resurrection. Okay. Was already waiting. It was not in the best of moods. You are late, he said. Sorry, Mr. Pennyworth. Pennyworth tutted. The previous week, Mr. Pennyworth had been teaching Bod about elements and humors, and Bod had kept forgetting which was which. He was expecting a test, but instead, Mr. Pennyworth said, I think it is time to spend a few days on practical matters. Time is passing, after all. Is it? Asked Bod. I'm afraid so, young Master Owens. Now, how is your fading? Bod had hoped that he would not be asked that question. It's all right, he said. I mean, you know. No, Master Owens, I do not. Why do you not demonstrate for me? Bod's heart sank. He took a deep breath and did his best, squinching up his eyes and trying to fade away. Mr. Pennyworth was not impressed. Pah, that's not the kind of thing. Not the kind of thing at all. Slipping and fading, boy, the way of the dead. Slip through shadows, fade from awareness. Try again. Bod tried harder. You're as plain as the nose on your face, said Mr. Pennyworth, and your nose is remarkably obvious, as is the rest of your face, young man, as are you. For the sake of all that is holy, empty your mind. Now, you are an empty alleyway. You are a vacant doorway. You are nothing. Eyes will not see you. Minds will not hold you. Where you are is nothing and nobody. Bod tried again. He closed his eyes and imagined himself fading into the stained stonework of the mausoleum wall, becoming a shadow on the night, and nothing more. He sneezed. Dreadful, said Mr. Pennyworth with a sigh. Quite dreadful. I believe I shall have a word with your guardian about this. He shook his head. So, the humors. List them. Sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and the other one. Melancholic, I think. And so it went until it was time for grammar and composition with Miss Letitia Barrows, spinster of the parish, who did no harm to no man all the days of her life. Reader, can you say likewise? I like that they have like the tombstones and like their inscriptions written in their introductions here. It's really interesting. Bod liked Miss Barrows and the coziness of her little crypt, and that she could all too easily be let off the subject. Of course he would like that. They say there's a witch in unconsecrated ground, he said. Yes, dear, but you don't want to go over there. Why not? Miss Barrows smiled, the guileless smile of the dead. They aren't our sort of people, she said. But it is the graveyard, isn't it? I mean, I'm allowed to go there if I want to. That, said Miss Barrows, would not be advisable. Bod was obedient but curious, and so, when lessons were done for the night, he walked past Harrison Westwood Baker and his family's memorial, a broken-armed angel, but did not climb down the hill to Potter's Field. Instead, he walked up the side of the hill to where a picnic, some 30 years before, had left its mark in the shape of a large apple tree. There were some lessons that Bod had mastered. He had eaten a bellyful of unripe apples, sour and white-pipped from the tree some years before, and had regretted it for days, his guts cramping and painful while Mrs. Owens lectured him on what not to eat. Now he always waited until the apples were ripe before eating them, and never ate more than 2 or 3 a night. He had finished the last of the apples the week before, but he liked the apple tree as a place to think. He edged up the trunk to his favorite place in the crook of 2 branches, and looked down at the potter's field below him, a brambly patch of weeds and unmown grass in the moonlight. He wondered whether the witch would be old and iron-toothed and travel in a house on chicken legs, like Baba Yaga, or whether she would be thin and sharp-nosed and carry a broomstick. Bod's stomach growled, and he realized that he was getting hungry. He wished he had not devoured all the apples on the tree, that he'd just left one. He glanced up and thought he saw something. He looked once, looked twice, to be certain. An apple, red and ripe. Bod prided himself on his tree-climbing skills. He swung himself up branch by branch and imagined he was Silas, swarming smoothly up a sheer brick wall. The apple, the red of it almost black in the moonlight, hung just out of reach. Bod moved slowly forward along the branch until he was just below the apple. Then he stretched up, and the tips of his fingers touched the perfect apple. He was never to taste it. A snap, loud as a hunter's gun, as the branch gave way beneath him. A flash of pain woke him, sharp as ice, the color of slow thunder, down in the weeds that summer's night. The ground beneath him seemed relatively soft and oddly warm. He pushed a hand down and felt something like warm fur beneath him. He had landed on the grass pile where the graveyard's groundskeeper threw the cuttings from the mower, and it had broken his fall. Still there was a pain in his chest, and his leg hurt as if he had landed on it first and twisted it. Bod moaned. "Husha, you, husha, boy," said a voice from behind him. "Where did you come from?" dropping like a thunderstone. "What way is that to carry on?" "I was in the apple tree," said Bod. "Ah, let me see your leg." "Broken like the tree's limb, I'll be bound." Cool fingers prodded his left leg. "Not broken." "Twisted, yes. Sprained, perhaps." "You have the devil's own luck, boy, falling into the compost." "'Tain't the end of the world." Compost. Doo-doo. "Oh, good," said Bod. "Hurts, though." He turned his head, looked up and behind him. She was older than him, but not a grown-up, and she looked neither friendly nor unfriendly. Wary, mostly. She had a face that was intelligent and not even a little bit beautiful. "I'm Bod," he said. "The live boy?" she asked. Bod nodded. "I thought you must be," she said. "We've heard of you, even over here in the Potter's Field. What do they call you?" "Owens," he said. "Nobody Owens. Bod for short." Howdy do, young Master Bod." Bod looked her up and down. She wore a plain white shift. Her hair was mousy and long, and there was something of the goblin in her face, a sideways hint of a smile that seemed to linger no matter what the rest of her face was doing. "Were you a suicide?" he asked. "Did you steal a shilling?" "Never stole nothin'," she said. "Not even a handkerchief." "Anyway," she said pertly, "the suicides is all over there on the other side of that hawthorn, and the gallows birds are in the blackberry patch, both of them. One was a coiner, t'other was a highwayman, or so he says, although if you ask me, I doubt he was more than a common footpad and nightwalker." "Ah," said Bod. Then, suspicion forming tentatively, he said, "They say a witch is buried here." She nodded. "Drowned and burned and buried here without as much as a stone to mark the spot." "You were drowned and burned?" She settled down on the hill of grass cuttings beside him, and held his throbbing leg with her chilly hands. "They come to my little cottage at dawn, before I'm proper awake, and drags me out into the green. 'You're a witch!' they shouts, fat and fresh scrubbed, all pink in the morning. Ah, like so many pigwiggins scrubbed clean for market day. One by one they gets up beneath the sky and tells of milk gone sour and horses gone lame, and finally Mistress Jemima gets up, the fattest, pinkest, best scrubbed of them all, and tells how a Solomon Port It tells how a Solomon Porrid now cuts her dead and instead hangs around the wash-house like a wasp about a honey-pot, and it's all my magic, she says, that made him so, and the poor young man must be bespelled. So they strap me to the cooking stool, and forces it under the water of the duck pond, saying if I'm a witch I'll neither drown nor care, but if I am not a witch I'll feel it. And Mistress Jemima's father gives them each a silver groat to hold the stool down under the foul green water for a long time to see if I'd choke on it. And did you? Oh, yes, got a lungful of water. It done for me. Oh, said Bod. Then you weren't a witch after all. The girl fixed him with her beady ghost eyes and smiled a lopsided smile. She still looked like a goblin, but now she looked like a pretty goblin, and Bod didn't think she would have needed magic to attract Solomon Porrid, not with a smile like that. Oh, that's nice. Kind of. What nonsense. Of course I was a witch. They learned that when they untied me from the cucking stool and stretched me on the green, 9 parts dead and all covered with duckweed and stinking pond muck. I rolled my eyes back in my head, and I cursed each and every one of them on the village green that morning, that none of them would ever rest easily in a grave. I was surprised at how easily it came, the cursing. Like dancing it was when your feet pick up the steps of a new measure your ears have never heard, and your head don't know, and they dance it till dawn. She stood and twirled and kicked, and her bare feet flashed in the moonlight. That was how I cursed them, with my last gurgling pond-watery breath, and then I expired. They'd burned my body on the green until I was nothing but blackened charcoal, and they popped me in a hole in the potter's field without so much as a headstone to mark my name. And it was only then that she paused and seemed for a moment wistful. Are any of them buried in the graveyard, then? Asked Bod. Not a one, said the girl with a twinkle. The Saturday after they drowned it and toasted me, a carpet was delivered to Master Porringer all the way from London town, and it was a fine carpet. But it turned out that there was more in that carpet than strong wool and good weaving, for it carried the plague in its pattern, and by Monday 5 of them were coughing blood, and their skins were gone as black as mine when they hauled me from the fire. A week later, and it had taken most of the village, and they threw the bodies all promiscuous in a plague pit they dug outside the town, that they filled in after. Was everyone in the village killed? She shrugged. Everyone who watched me get drowned and burned. How's your leg now? Better, he said. Thanks. Bod stood up slowly and limped down from the grass pile. He leaned against the iron railings. So, were you always a witch? He asked. I mean, before you cursed them all? As if it would take witchcraft, she said with a sniff, to get Solomon Porrid mooning round my cottage. Which, Bod thought, but did not say, was actually an answer to the question. Not at all. Which Bod thought, but did not say, was not actually an answer to the question. Not at all. What's your name? He asked. Got no headstone, she said, turning down the corners of her mouth. Might be anybody. Mightn't I? But you must have a name. Liza Hempstock, if you please, she said tartly. Then she said, It's not that much to ask, is it? Something to mark my grave? I'm just down there, see? With nothing but nettles to show where I rest. And she looked so sad, just for a moment, that Bod wanted to hug her. And then it came to him, as he squeezed between the railings of the fence, he would find Liza Hempstock a headstone, with her name upon it. He would make her smile. He turned to wave goodbye as he began to clamber up the hill, but she was already gone. There were broken lumps of other people's stones and statues in the graveyard, but Bod knew that would have been entirely the wrong sort of thing to bring to the gray-eyed witch of the Potter's Field. It was going to take more than that. He decided not to tell anyone what he was planning, on the not entirely unreasonable basis that they would have told him not to do it. Over the next few days, his mind filled with plans, each more complicated and extravagant than the last. Mr. Pennyworth despaired. I do believe, he announced, scratching his dusty mustache, that you are getting, if anything, worse. You are not fading. You are obvious, boy. You were difficult to miss. If you came to me in company with a purple lion, a green elephant, and a scarlet unicorn astride which the King of England in his royal robes, I do believe that it is you, and you alone, that people would stare at, dismissing the others as minor irrelevancies. Wow, that's strong words. Bod simply stared at him and said nothing. He was wondering whether there were special shops in the places where the living people gather that sold only headstones, and if so, how he could go about finding one, and fading was the least of his problems. Just gonna grab some water. I know, right? Like, tell me how you really feel. Very harsh words towards an 8-year-old. He's trying his best, you know? He's only been 8 for a year. Okay. He took advantage of Miss Barrow's willingness to be diverted from the subjects of grammar and composition to the subject of anything else at all to ask her about money, how exactly it worked, how one used it to get things one wanted. Bod had a number of coins he had found over the years. He had learned that the best place to find money was to go afterwards to wherever courting couples had used the grass of the graveyard as a place to cuddle and snuggle and kiss and roll about. People would... Alright. Not really the place to do that. He would often find metal coins on the ground in the places where they had been, and he thought perhaps he could finally get some use from them. How much would a headstone be? He asked Miss Barrows. In my time, she told him, there were 15 guineas. They were 15 guineas. I do not know what they would be today. More, I imagine. Much, much more. Bod had £2.53. It would, he was quite certain, not be enough. It had been 4 years, almost half a lifetime, since Bod had visited the Indigo Man's tomb, but he still remembered the way. He climbed to the top of the hill until he was above the whole town, above even the top of the apple tree, above even the steeple of the little chapel, up where the Frobisher mausoleum stood like a rotten tooth. He slipped down into it, behind the coffin, and down, and still further down to the tiny stone steps cut into the center of the hill, and those he descended until he reached the stone chamber. It was dark in that tomb, dark as a tin mine, but Bod saw as the dead see, and the room gave up its secrets to him. The sleer was coiled around the wall of the barrow. He could feel it. It was as he remembered it. An invisible thing, all smoky tendrils and hate and greed. This time, however, he was not afraid of it. "Fear us," whispered the sleer, "for we guard things precious and never lost." "I don't fear you," said Bod. "Remember? And I need to take something away from here." "Nothing ever leaves," came the reply from the coiled thing in the darkness. "The knife, the brooch, the goblet. The sleer guards them in the darkness. We wait." "Pardon me for asking," said Bod, "but was this your grave?" "Master sets us here on the plain to guard, buries our skulls beneath his stone, leaves us here knowing what we have to do. We guard the treasures until Master comes back." "I expect that he's forgotten all about you," pointed out Bod. "I'm sure he's been dead himself for ages." "We are the sleer. We guard." Bod wondered just how long ago you had to go back before the deepest tomb inside the hill was on a plain, and he knew it must have been an extremely long time ago. He could feel the sleer winding its waves of fear around him like the tendrils of some carnivorous plant. He was beginning to feel cold and slow, as if he had been bitten in the heart by some arctic viper, and it was starting to pump its icy venom through his body. He took a step forward, so he was standing against the stone slab, and he reached down and closed his fingers around the coldness of the brooch. "Hish!" whispered the sleer. "We guard that for the master." "He won't mind," said Bod. He took a step backward, walking toward the stone steps, avoiding the desiccated remains of people and animals on the floor. The sleer writhed angrily, twining around the tiny chamber like ghost smoke. Then it slowed. "It comes back," said the sleer in its tangled triple voice. "Always comes back." Bod went up the stone steps inside the hill as fast as he could. At one point he imagined that there was something coming after him, but when he broke out of the top, into the Frobisher mausoleum, and he could breathe the cool dawn air, nothing moved or followed. Bod sat in the open air on the top of the hill and held the brooch. He thought it was all black at first, but then the sun rose and he could see that the stone in the center of the black metal was a swirling red. It was the size of a robin's egg, and Bod stared into the stone, wondering if there were things moving in its heart, his eyes and soul deep in the crimson world. If Bod had been smaller, he would have wanted to put, if Bod had been smaller, he'd have wanted to put it in his mouth. The stone was held in place by a black metal clasp, by something that looked like claws, with something else crawling around it. The something else looked almost snake-like, but it had too many heads. Bod wondered if that was what the sphere looked like in the daylight. He wandered down the hill, taking all the shortcuts. Yeah, this can't be a bad idea. He's brave, but he's kind of stupid. I mean, you know, I don't think this is a good idea. Just saying. He wandered down the hill, taking all the shortcuts he knew through the ivy tangle that covered the Bartleby family vault, and inside, the sound of the Bartlebys grumbling and readying for sleep, and on and over and through the railings and into the potter's field. He called, "Liza! Liza!" and looked around. Good morrow, young lummox," said Liza's voice. Bod could not see her, but there was an extra shadow beneath a hawthorn tree, and as he approached it, the shadow resolved itself into something pearlescent and translucent in the early morning light, something girl-like, something gray-eyed. "I should be decently sleeping," she said. "What kind of carrying on is this?" "Your headstone," he said. "I wanted to know what you want on it." "My name," she said. It must have my name on it, with a big E for Elizabeth, like the old queen that died when I was born, and a big H for Hemstock. More than that I care not, for I did never master my letters." "What about dates?" asked Bod. "William the Conqueror, 1066, she sang, in the whisper of the dawn wind in the hawthorn tree. "A big E, if you please, and a big H." "Did you have a job?" asked Bod. "I mean, when you weren't being a witch?" "I done laundry," said the dead girl. And then the morning sunlight flooded the wasteland, and Bod was alone. It was 9 in the morning when all the world was sleeping. Bod was determined to stay awake. He was, after all, on a mission. He was 8 years old, and the world beyond the graveyard held no terrors for him. Oh my God! What are you doing, Bod? You're gonna leave the graveyard? Why is he just getting dumber? I agree with Mr. Pennyworth, he's getting worse. Clothes. He would need clothes. His usual dress of a gray winding sheet was, he knew, quite wrong. It was good in the graveyard, the same color as stone and as shadows, but if he was going to dare the world beyond the graveyard walls, he would need to blend in there. There were some clothes in the crypt beneath the ruined church, but Bod did not want to go down to the crypt, not even in daylight. While Bod was prepared to justify himself to Master and Mistress Owens, he was not about to explain himself to Silas. The very thought of those dark eyes angry, or worse still, disappointed, filled him with shame. There was a gardener's hut at the far end of the graveyard, a small green building that smelled like motor oil, and in which the old mower sat and rusted, unused among an assortment of ancient garden tools. The hut had been abandoned when the last gardener had retired before Bod was born, and the task of keeping the graveyard had been shared between the council, who sent in a man to cut the grass and clean the paths once a month from April to September, and the local volunteers and the Friends of the Graveyard. A huge padlock on the door protected the contents of the hut, but Bod had long ago discovered the loose wooden board in the back. Sometimes he would go to the gardener's hut and sit and think, when he wanted to be by himself. As long as he had been going to the hut, there had been a brown working man's jacket hanging on the back of the door, forgotten or abandoned years before, along with a green-stained pair of gardening jeans. The jeans were much too big for him, but he rolled up the cuffs until his feet showed, and he made a belt out of brown garden twine and tied it around his waist. There were boots in one corner, and he tried putting them on, but they were so big and encrusted with mud and concrete that he could barely shuffle in them. And if he took a step, the boots remained on the floor of the shed. He pushed the jacket out through the space in the loose board, squeezed himself out, then put it on. If he rolled up the sleeves, he decided it worked quite well. It had big pockets, and he thrust his hands into them and felt quite the dandy. Bod walked down to the main gate of the graveyard and looked out through the bars. A bus rattled past in the street. There were cars there, and noise and shops. Behind him, a cool green shade overgrown with trees and ivy. Home. His heart pounding, Bod walked out into the world. Ebenezer Bulger had seen some odd types in his time. If you owned a shop like Ebenezer's, you'd see them too. The shop in the warren of the streets of the old town, a little bit antique shop, a little bit junk shop, a little bit pawnbrokers, and not even Ebenezer himself was entirely certain which bit was which. Brought odd types and strange people, some of them wanting to buy, some of them needing to sell. Ebenezer Bulger traded over the counter, buying and selling, and he did a better trade behind the counter and in the back room, accepting objects that may not have been acquired entirely honestly, and then quietly shifting them on. His business was an iceberg. Only the dusty little shop was visible on the surface. The rest of it was underneath. And that was just how Ebenezer Bulger wanted it. Ebenezer Bulger had thick spectacles and a permanent expression of mild distaste, as if he had just realized that the milk in his tea had been on the turn, and he could not get the sour taste of it out of his mouth. The expression served him well when people tried to sell him things. Honestly, he would tell them, sour-faced, it's not really worth anything at all. I'll give you what I can, though, as it has sentimental value. You were lucky to get anything like what you thought you wanted from Ebenezer Bulger. A business like Ebenezer Bulger's brought in strange people, but the boy who came in that morning was one of the strangest Ebenezer could remember in a lifetime of cheating strange people out of their valuables. He looked to be about 7 years old and dressed in his grandfather's clothes. He smelled like a shed. His hair was long and shaggy, and he seemed extremely grave. Ha ha ha, that seems like a pun. His hands were deep in the pockets of a dusty brown jacket, but even with the hands out of sight, Ebenezer could see that something was clutched extremely tightly, protectively, in the boy's right hand. "Excuse me," said the boy. "Aye, aye, Sonny Jim," said Ebenezer Bulger wearily. Kids, he thought, either they've nicked something or they're trying to sell their toys. Either way, he usually said no. Buy stolen property from a kid, and next thing you know you'd have an enraged adult accusing you of having given little Johnny or Matilda a tenner for their wedding ring. More trouble than they was worth, kids. "I need something for a friend of mine," said the boy, "and I thought maybe you could buy something I've got." "I don't buy stuff from kids," said Ebenezer Bulger flatly. Bob took his hand out of his pocket and put the brooch down on the grimy countertop. Bulger glanced down at it and then looked at it. He removed his spectacles. He took an eyepiece from the countertop and he screwed it into his eye. He turned on a little light on the counter and examined the brooch through the eyeglass. "Snakestone?" he said, to himself, not the boy. Then he took the eyepiece out, replaced his glasses, and fixed the boy with a sour, suspicious look. "Where did you get this?" Ebenezer Bulger asked. Bod said, "Do you want to buy it?" "You stole it. You've nicked this from a museum or somewhere, didn't you?" "No," said Bod flatly. "Are you going to buy it, or shall I go and find someone who will?" Ebenezer Bulger's sour mood changed then. Suddenly he was all affability. He smiled broadly. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's just you don't see many pieces like this, on a shop like this. Not outside of a museum. But I would certainly like it. Tell you what, why don't we sit down over tea and biscuits? I've got a pack of chocolate chip cookies in the back room, and decide how much something like this is worth. Eh?" I like that they first pose that, what's it called? He has the back room for, like, business that's not legal. So now when he offers to go sit with him in the back room, it seems much less personal and kind and a little ominous and, yeah. Bod was relieved that the man was finally being friendly. "I need enough to buy a stone," he said. "A headstone for a friend of mine. Well, she's not really my friend. Just someone I know. I think she helped make my leg better, you see." Ebenezer Bulger, paying little attention to the boy's prattle, led him behind the counter and opened the door to the storeroom, a windowless little space, every inch of which was crammed high with teetering cardboard boxes, each filled with junk. There was a safe in there, in the corner, a big old one. There was a box filled with violins, an accumulation of stuffed dead animals, chairs without seats, books and prints. There was a small desk beside the door, and Ebenezer Bulger pulled up the only chair and sat down, letting Bod stand. Ebenezer rummaged in a drawer in which Bod could see a half-empty bottle of whiskey and pulled out an almost finished packet of chocolate chip cookies, and he offered one to the boy. He turned on the desk light, looked at the brooch again, the swirls of red and orange in the stone, and he examined the black metal band that encircled it, suppressing a little shiver at the expression on the heads of the snake things. This is old, he said. It's priceless, he thought. Probably not really worth much, but you never know. Bod's face fell. Ebenezer Bulger tried to look reassuring. I just need to know that it's not stolen, though, before I can give you a penny. Did you take it from your mum's dresser? Take it from a museum? You can tell me. I'll not get you into trouble. I just need to know. Bod shook his head. He munched on his cookie. Then where did you get it? Bod said nothing. Ebenezer Bulger did not want to put down the brooch, but he pushed it across the desk to the boy. If you can't tell me, he said, you'd better take it back. There has to be trust on both sides, after all. Nice doing business with you. Sorry it couldn't go any further. Bod looked worried. Then he said, I found it in an old grave, but I can't say where. He stopped, because naked greed and excitement had replaced the friendliness on Ebenezer Bulger's face. And there's more like this there? Bod said, if you don't want to buy it, I'll find someone else. Thank you for the biscuit. Bulger said, you're in a hurry, eh? Mum and Dad waiting for you, I expect? The boy shook his head, then wished he had nodded. Nobody waiting. Good. Ebenezer Bulger closed his hands around the brooch. Now you tell me exactly where you found this, eh? I don't remember, said Bod. Too late for that, said Ebenezer Bulger. Suppose you have a little think for a bit where it came from. Then, when you've thought, we'll have a little chat, and you'll tell me. He got up and walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. He locked it with a large metal key. Okay. He opened his hand and looked at the brooch and smiled hungrily. There was a ding from the bell above the shop door to let him know that someone had entered, and he looked up guiltily. Guiltily, but there was no one there. The door was slightly ajar, though, and Bulger pushed it shut, and then, for good measure, he turned around the sign in the window so it said closed. He pushed the bolt shut. Didn't want any busybodies turning up today. The autumn day had turned from sunny to gray, and a light patter of rain ran down the grubby shop window. Ebenezer Bulger picked up the telephone from the counter and pushed at the buttons with fingers that barely shook. Pay dirt, Tom, he said. Get over here as soon as you can. Yeah, I hate this guy too. Bod realized that he was trapped when he heard the lock turn in the door. He pulled on the door, but it held fast. He felt stupid for having been lured inside, foolish for not trusting his first impulses, to get as far away from the sour-faced man as possible. He had broken all the rules of the graveyard, and everything had gone wrong. What would Silas say? Or the Owenses? He could feel himself beginning to panic, and he suppressed it, pushing the worry back down inside himself. It would all be good. He knew that. Of course. He needed to get out. He examined the room he was trapped in. It was little more than a storeroom with a desk in it. The only entrance was the door. He opened the desk drawer, finding nothing but small pots of paint, used for brightening up antiques, and a paintbrush. He wondered if he would be able to throw paint in the man's face. Sorry. He wondered if he would be able to throw paint in the man's face and blind him for long enough to escape. He opened the top of a pot of paint and dipped his finger in. What are you doing? Asked a voice close to his ear. Nothing, said Bod, screwing the top of the paint pot and dropping it into one of the jacket's enormous pockets. Liza Hempstock looked at him, unimpressed. Why you in here? She asked. And whose old bag of lard out there? It's his shop. I was trying to sell him something. Why? None of your beeswax. She sniffed. Well, she said, you should get on back to the graveyard. I can't. He's locked me in. Of course you can. Just slip through the wall. He shook his head. I can't. I can only do it at home because they gave me the freedom of the graveyard when I was a baby. He looked up at her under the electric light. It was hard to see her properly, but Bod had spent his life talking to dead people. Anyway, what are you doing here? What are you doing out from the graveyard? It's daytime, and you're not like Silas. You're meant to stay in the graveyard. She said, there's rules for those in graveyards, but not for those as was buried in unhallowed ground. Nobody tells me what to do or where to go. She glared at the door. I don't like that man. She said, I'm going to see what he's doing. A flicker, and Bod was alone in the room once more. He heard a rumble of distant thunder. In the cluttered darkness of Bulger's antiquities, Ebenezer Bulger looked up suspiciously, certain that someone was watching him, then realized he was being foolish. The boy is locked in the room, he told himself. The front door's locked. He was polishing the metal clasps surrounding the snakestone as gently and as carefully as an archaeologist on a dig, taking off the black and revealing the glittering silver beneath it. He was beginning to regret calling Tom Hustings over. Although Hustings was big and good for scaring people, he was also beginning to regret that he was going to have to sell the brooch when he was done. It was special. The more it glittered under the tiny light of his counter, the more he wanted it to be his, and his alone. There were more where this came from, though. The boy would tell him. The boy would lead him to it. The boy... An idea struck him. He put down the brooch reluctantly and opened a drawer behind the counter, taking out a metal biscuit tin filled with envelopes and cards and slips of paper. He reached in and took out a card only slightly larger than a business card. It was black-edged. There was no name or address printed on it, though. Only one word, handwritten in the center in an ink that had faded to brown. Jack. On the back of the card, in pencil, Ebenezer Bulger had written instructions to himself in his tiny, precise handwriting as a reminder, although he would not have been likely to forget the use of the card, how to use it to summon the man Jack. No, not summon. Invite. You did not summon people like him. A knocking on the outer door of the shop. Bulger tossed the card down onto the counter and walked over to the door, peering out into the wet afternoon. "Hurry up!" called Tom Hustings. "It's miserable out here! Dismal! I'm getting soaked!" Bulger unlocked the door, and Tom Hustings pushed his way in, his raincoat and hair dripping. "What's so important that you can't talk about it over the phone, then?" "Our fortune," said Ebenezer Bulger with his sour face. "That's what." Hustings took off his raincoat and hung it on the back of the shop door. "What is it? Something good fell off the back of the lorry?" "Treasure," said Ebenezer Bulger. "Two kinds." He took his friend over to the counter, showed him the brooch under the little light. "It's old, isn't it?" "From pagan times," said Ebenezer. From Druid times. Before the Romans came. It's called a snake stone. Seen 'em in museums. I've never seen metalwork like that, or one so fine. Must have belonged to a king. The lad who found it says it come from a grave. Think of a barrow filled with stuff like this." "Might be worth doing it legit," said Hustings thoughtfully. "Declare it as a treasure trove. They have to pay us market value for it, and we could make them name it after us. The Hustings-Bulger bequest." "Bulger Hustings," said Ebenezer automatically. Then he said, "There's a few people I know of, people with real money, would pay more than market value if they could hold it as you are." For Tom Hustings was fingering the brooch gently like a man stroking a kitten. "And there'd be no questions asked." He reached out his hand, and reluctantly Tom Hustings passed him the brooch. "You said two kinds of treasure," said Hustings. "What's the other?" Ebenezer Bulger picked up the black-edged card, held it out for his friend's inspection. "Do you know what this is?" His friend shook his head. Ebenezer put the card down on the counter. "There's a party is looking for another party." "So?" "The way I heard it," said Ebenezer Bulger, "the other party is a boy." "There's boys everywhere," said Tom Hustings, "running all around, getting into trouble. I can't abide them." "So there's a party looking for a particular boy?" "This lad looks to be the right sort of age. He's dressed... well, you'll see how he's dressed. And he found this. It could be him. And if it is him..." Ebenezer Bulger picked up the card again by the edge and waved it back and forth, slowly, as if running the edge along an imaginary flame. "Here comes a candle to light you to bed," he began. "And here comes a chopper to chop off your head," concluded Tom Hustings thoughtfully. "But look you, if we call the man Jack, we lose the boy. And if we lose the boy, we lose the treasure." And the two men went back and forth on it, weighing the merits and disadvantages of reporting the boy or the collecting of the treasure, which had grown in their minds to a huge underground cavern filled with precious things, and as they debated, Ebenezer pulled a bottle of sloe gin. Sloe gin? S-L-O-E? I've never seen that before. Sloe gin from beneath the counter and poured them both a generous tot. to assist the celebrations. Liza was soon bored with their discussion, which went back and forth and around like a whirligig, getting nowhere, and so she went back to the storeroom to find Bod standing in the middle of the room with his eyes tightly closed and his fists clenched and his face all screwed up as if he had a toothache, almost purple from holding his breath. "What are you doing now?" she asked, unimpressed. He opened his eyes and relaxed. "Trying to fade," he said. Liza sniffed. "Try again," she said. He did, holding his breath, even longer this time. "Stop that," she told him, "or you'll pop." Bod took a deep breath and then sighed. "It doesn't work," he said. "Maybe I could hit him with a rock and just run for it." There wasn't a rock, so he picked up a colored glass paperweight, hefted it in his hand, wondering if he could throw it hard enough to stop Ebenezer Bulger in his tracks. "There's 2 of them out there now," said Liza, "and if the one don't get you, the other one will. They say they want to get you to show them where you got the brooch, and then dig up the grave and take the treasure." She did not tell him about the other discussion they were having, nor about the black-edged card. She shook her head. "Why did you do something as stupid as this anyway? You know the rules about leaving the graveyard. Just asking for trouble it was." Sorry, you don't know what? Oh, the slow gin, SLOE. Oh, okay. I get it. Bod felt very insignificant and very foolish. "I wanted to get you a headstone," he admitted in a small voice. "And I thought it would cost more money, so I was going to sell him the brooch to buy you one." She didn't say anything. "Are you angry?" She shook her head. "It's the first nice thing anyone's done for me in 500 years, she said with a hint of a goblin smile. "Why would I be angry?" And she said, "What do you do when you try to fade?" "Well, Mr. Pennyworth told me, I am an empty doorway, I am a vacant alley, I am nothing, eyes will not see me, glances slip over me. But it never works." "It's because you're alive," said Liza with a sniff. "There's stuff as works for us the dead, who have to fight to be noticed at the best of times. That won't never work for you people." She hugged herself tightly, moving her body back and forth as if she was debating something. Then she said, "It's because of me you got into this. Come here, Nobody Owens." He took a step towards her in that tiny room, and she put her cold hand on his forehead. It felt like a wet silk scarf against his skin. "Now," she said, "perhaps I can do a good turn for you." And with that she began to mutter to herself, mumbling words that Bod could not make out. Then she said, clear and loud, "Be whole, be dust, be dream, be wind, be night, be dark, be wish, be mind. Now slip, now slide, now move unseen, above, beneath, betwixt, between." Something huge touched him, brushed him from head to feet, and he shivered. His hair prickled, and his skin was all gooseflesh. Something had changed. "What did you do?" he asked. "Just giving you a helping hand." "Just give you a helping hand," she said. "I may be dead, but I'm a dead witch, remember? And we don't forget." "But—" "Hush up," she said. "They're coming back." The key rattled in the storeroom lock. "Now then, chummy," said a voice Bod had not heard clearly before. "I'm sure we're all going to be great friends." And with that, Tom Hustings pushed open the door. Then he stood in the doorway, looked around, looking puzzled. He was a big, big man with foxy red hair and a bottle red nose. "Here, Ebenezer? Here." "Ebenezer? I thought you said he was in here." "I did," said Bulger from behind him. "Well, I can't see hide nor hair of him." Bulger's face appeared behind the ruddy man's, and he peered into the room. "Hiding," he said, staring straight at where Bod was standing. "No use hiding," he announced loudly. "I can see you there. Come on out." The 2 men walked into the little room, and Bod stood stock still between them and thought of Mr. Pennyworth's lessons. He did not react. He did not move. He let the men's glances slide from him without seeing him. "You're going to wish you'd come out when I called," said Bulger, and he shut the door. "Right," he said to Tom Hustings. "You block the door so he can't get past." And with that he walked around the room, peering behind things and bending awkwardly to look beneath the desk. He walked straight past Bod and opened the cupboard. "Now I see you," he shouted. "Come out!" Liza giggled. "What was that?" asked Tom Hustings, spinning around. "I didn't hear nothin'," said Ebenezer Bulger. Liza giggled again. Then she put her lips together and blew, making a noise that began as a whistling and then sounded like a distant wind. The electric lights in the little room flickered and buzzed, then they went out. "Bloody fuses," said Ebenezer Bulger. "Come on! This is a waste of time!" The key clicked into the lock, and Liza and Bod were left alone in the room. "He's got away," said Ebenezer Bulger. Bod could hear him now through the door, a room like that. "There wasn't anywhere he could have been hiding. We'd have seen him if he was. The man Jack won't like that. Who's going to tell him?" A pause. "Here. Tom Hustings, where's the brooch gone?" That? Here. I was keeping it safe. Keeping it safe! In your pocket! Funny place to be keeping it safe if you ask me. More like you were planning to make off with it. Like you was planning to keep my brooch for yourself, for your own. Your brooch, Ebenezer, your brooch! Our brooch, you mean? Ours, indeed. I don't remember you being here when I got it from the boy. That boy that you couldn't even keep safe from a man for the man Jack, you mean? Can you imagine what he'll do when he finds you had the boy he was looking for and you let him go? Probably not the same boy. Lots of boys in the world. What are the odds it was the one he was looking for? Out the back door as soon as my back was turned, I'll bet. And then Ebenezer Bulger said in a high, wheedling voice, "Don't you worry about the man Jack, Tom Hustings. I'm sure that it was a different boy. My old mind playing tricks. I'm almost out of sloe gin. Would you fancy a good scotch? I've whiskey in the back room. You just wait here a moment." The storeroom door was unlocked, and Ebenezer entered, holding a walking stick and a flashlight, looking even more sour of face than before. "If you're still in here," he said in a sour mutter, "don't even think about making a run for it. I've called the police on you, that's what I've done." A rummage into the drawer produced the half-filled bottle of whiskey, and then a tiny black bottle. Ebenezer poured several drops from the little bottle into the larger, and then he pocketed the tiny bottle. "My brooch and mine alone," he muttered, and followed it with a barked, "Just coming, Tom!" He glared around the dark room, staring past Bod. Then he left the storeroom, carrying the whiskey in front of him. He locked the door behind him. "Here you go," came Ebenezer Bulger's voice from the door. "Give us your glass, then, Tom. Nice drop of scotch. Put hairs on your chest. Say when." Silence. "Cheap muck. Aren't you drinking?" "That slow gin's gone to my innards. Give it a minute for my stomach to settle." Then, "Here, Tom! Here. Tom! What have you done with my brooch?" "Your brooch, is it now? What did you... You put something in my drink, you little grub." "What if I did? I could read on your face what you was planning, Tom Hustings. Thief." And then there was shouting, and several crashes and loud bangs, as if heavy items of furniture were being overturned. Then silence. Liza said, "Quickly now, let's get you out of here." "But the door's locked." He looked at her. "Is there something you can do?" "Me? I don't have any magics that will get you out of a locked room, boy." Bod crouched and peered out through the keyhole. It was blocked. The key sat in the keyhole. Bod thought then he smiled. Bod thought, then he smiled, momentarily, and it lit his face like a flash of a light bulb. He pulled a crumpled sheet of newspaper from a packing case, flattened it out as best as he could, then pushed it underneath the door, leaving only a corner on his side of the doorway. "What are you playing at?" asked Liza impatiently. "I need something like a pencil, only thinner," he said. Here we go," and he took a thin paintbrush from the top of the desk and pushed the brushless end into the lock and jiggled it, and pushed some more. There was a muffled clunk as the key was pushed out, as it dropped from the lock into the newspaper. Bod pulled the paper back under the door, now with the key sitting on it. Liza laughed, delighted. "That's wit, young man," she said. "That's wisdom." Bod put the key in the lock, turned it, and pushed open the storeroom door. There were two men on the floor, in the middle of the crowded antique shop. Furniture had indeed fallen. The place was a chaos of wrecked clocks and chairs, and in the midst of it, the bulk of Tom Hustings lay fallen on the smaller figure of Ebenezer Bulger. Neither of them was moving. "Are they dead?" asked Bod. "No such luck," said Liza. On the floor beside the men was a brooch of glittering silver, crimson orange banded stone, held in place with claws and with snake heads, and the expression on the snake heads was one of triumph and avarice and satisfaction. Bod dropped the brooch into his pocket, where it sat beside the heavy glass paperweight, the brush, and the little pot of paint. "Take this too," said Eliza. Bod looked at the black-edged card with the word Jack handwritten on the side. It disturbed him. There was something familiar about it, something that stirred old memories, something dangerous. I don't want it." "You can't leave it here with them," said Liza. "They were going to use it to hurt you." "I don't want it," said Bod. "It's bad. Burn it." "No," Liza gasped. "Don't do that. You mustn't do that." "Then I'll give it to Silas," said Bod. And he put the little card into an envelope so he had to touch it as little as possible, and put the envelope into the inside pocket of his old gardening jacket beside his heart. Turn off the air conditioner. It's cold. 200 miles away, the man Jack woke from his sleep and sniffed the air. He walked downstairs. "What is it?" asked his grandmother, stirring the contents of a big iron pot on the stove. "What's got into you now?" "I don't know," he said. "Something's happening. Something interesting." And then he licked his lips. "Smells tasty," he said. "Very tasty." Lightning illuminated the cobbled street. Bod hurried through the rain, through the old town, always heading up the hill toward the graveyard. The gray day had become an early night while he was inside the storeroom, and it came as no surprise to him when a familiar shadow swirled beneath the street lamps. Bod hesitated, and a flutter of night-black velvet resolved itself into a man-shape. Silas stood in front of him, arms folded. He strode forward impatiently. "Well?" he said. Bod said, "I'm sorry, Silas." "I'm disappointed in you, Bod," Silas said, and he shook his head. "I've been looking for you since I woke. You have the smell of trouble all around you, and you know you're not allowed to go out here into the living world." "I know. I'm sorry." There was rain on the boy's face, running down like tears. "First of all, we need to get you back to safety." Silas reached down and enfolded the living child inside his cloak, and Bod felt the ground fall away beneath him. "Silas," he said. Silas did not answer. "Yeah, I didn't expect to see with Jack and his grandma either." Silas did not answer. "I was a bit scared," he said, "but I knew you'd come and get me if it got too bad. And Liza was there. She helped a lot." "Liza?" Silas's voice was sharp. "The witch. From the Potter's Field." "And you say she helped you?" "Yes. She especially helped me with my fading. I think I can do it now." Silas grunted. "You can tell me all about it when we're home." And Bod was quiet until they landed beside the chapel. They went inside, into the empty hall, as the rain redoubled, splashing up from the puddles that covered the ground. Bod produced the envelope containing the black-edged card. He said, "I thought you should have this. Well, Liza did, really." Silas looked at it. Then he opened it, removed the card, stared at it, turned it over, and read Ebenezer Bulger's penciled note to himself in tiny handwriting, explaining the precise manner of use of the card. "Tell me everything," he said. Bod told him everything he could remember about the day, and at the end Silas shook his head, slowly, thoughtfully. "Am I in trouble?" asked Bod. "Nobody, Owens," said Silas. "You are indeed in trouble. However, I believe I shall leave it to your parents to administer whatever discipline and reproach they believe to be needed. In the meantime, I need to dispose of this." The black-edged card vanished inside the velvet cloak, and then, in the manner of his kind, Silas was gone. Bod pulled the jacket up over his head and clambered up the slippery paths to the top of the hill to the Frobisher mausoleum. He pulled aside Ephraim Pettifer's coffin, and he went down, and still further down. He replaced the brooch beside the goblet and the knife. "Here you go," he said, "all polished up. Looking pretty." "It comes back," said the Sleer with satisfaction in its smoke-tendril voice. "It always comes back." It had been a long night. Bod was walking sleepily and a little gingerly past the small tomb of the wonderfully named Miss Liberty Roach. What she spent is lost, what she gave remains with her always. Reader, be charitable. Past the final resting place of Harrison Westwood, baker of this parish, and his wives Marion and Joan, to the Potter's Field. Mr. and Mrs. Owens had died several hundred years before it had been decided that beating children was wrong, and Mr. Owens had, regretfully that night, done what he saw as his duty, and Bod's bottom stung like anything. Still, the look of worry on Mrs. Owens' face had hurt Bod worse than any beating could have done. He reached the iron railings that bounded the potter's field and slipped between them. "Hello?" he called. There was no answer, not even an extra shadow in the hawthorn tree. "I hope I didn't get you into trouble too," he said. Nothing. He had replaced the jeans in the gardener's hut. He was more comfortable in just his gray winding sheet. But he had kept the jacket. He liked having the pockets. When he had gone to the shed to return the jeans, he had taken a small hand scythe from the wall where it hung, and with it he attacked the nettle patch in the potter's field, sending the nettles flying, slashing and gutting them until there was nothing but stinging stubble on the ground. From his pocket he took the large glass paperweight and its insides a multitude of bright colors, along with a paint pot, and dipped the brush. He dipped the brush into the paint and carefully painted in brown paint on the surface of the paperweight the letters. Oh. I'll read it to you in a second if you couldn't see it. E.H. And beneath that he wrote, "We don't forget." Bedtime soon, and it would not be wise for him to be late to bed for some time to come. He put the paperweight down on the ground that had once been a nettle patch, placed it in the place that he estimated her head would have been, and pausing only to look at his handiwork for a moment, he went through the railings and made his way, rather less gingerly, back up the hill. "Not bad," said a pert voice from the potter's field behind him. "Not bad at all." But when he turned to look, there was no one there. Woo! I can keep... I'm wondering if I should keep going. Let's see how long this next chapter is. Oh, it's not too long, I think. Hold on. Like another 20 pages. Let me know if you want me to keep going, or if you're good with stopping. It's up to you guys. I'm okay to keep reading, especially because I started late today. My back just kind of hurts. Or it doesn't really hurt, it's just sore. I don't know. Muscles. Bleh. Okay. That's okay. It's, like I said, it's like, even though it's not rainy over here, it's like my body thinks it's rainy. Yeah, I mean, do whatever you need to do. It's okay. I'll keep going for a little bit. And yeah, everybody just do what they have to do. So, chapter 5. I'm wondering if this is like, because obviously I'd pronounce the second word here as macabre, but I'm wondering if it's another language, maybe German? Danse macabre? I can't speak German or anything, so... let's just call it a macabre dance. Something was going on. Odd? Something was going on. Bod was certain of it. It was there in the crisp winter air, and the stars, and the wind, and the darkness. It was there in the rhythms of the long nights and the fleeting days. Mistress Owens pushed him out of the Owens' little tomb. "Get along with you," she said. "I've got business to attend to." Bod looked up at his mother. "But it's cold out there," he said. "I should hope so," she said, "it being winter. That's as it should be. Now," she said more to herself than to Bod, "shoes. And look at this dress, it needs hemming. And cobwebs, oh, there are cobwebs all over, for heaven's sakes. You get along," this to Bod once more. "I've plenty to be getting on with, and I don't need you underfoot." And then she sang to herself a little couplet Bod had never heard before. "Rich man, poor man, come away, come to dance the macabre." "What's that?" asked Bod, but it was wrong. It was... Oh, yeah, let me just show you little Bod's face. That is over here. What's that?" asked Bod, but it was the wrong thing to have said, for Mistress Owens looked dark as a thundercloud, and Bod hurried out of the tomb before she could express her displeasure more forcefully. It was cold in the graveyard, cold and dark, and the stars were already out. Bod passed Mother Slaughter and the ivy-covered Egyptian walk, squinting at the greenery. Your eyes are younger than mine, young man," she said. "Can you see blossom?" "Blossom? In the winter?" "Don't you look at me with that face on, young man," she said. "Things blossom in their time. They bud and bloom, blossom and fade. Everything in its time." She huddled deeper into her cloak and bonnet, and she said, "Time to work and time to play. Time to dance the macabre. Eh, boy?" "I don't know," said Bod. "What's the macabre?" But Mother Slaughter had pushed into the ivy and was gone from sight. "How odd," said Bod aloud. He sought warmth and company in the bustling Bartleby mausoleum. But the Bartleby family, 7 generations of them, had no time for him that night. They were cleaning and tidying, all of them, from the oldest, death date 1831, to the youngest, death date 1690. That's wrong, isn't it? Anyway. Fortinbras Bartleby, 10 years old when he had died of consumption, had told Bod, who I guess that actually has no bearing on whether they're the oldest or the youngest, because, like, they could have died quite young, but lived a longer time ago from the oldest. Confusing, but it makes sense. Yeah. Fortinbras Bartleby, 10 years old when he had died of consumption, he had told Bod, who had mistakenly believed for several years that Fortinbras had been eaten by lions or bears, and was extremely disappointed to learn it was merely a disease. Now apologized to Bod. "We cannot stop to play, Master Bod, for soon enough tomorrow night comes." "And how often can a man say that?" "Every night," said Bod. "Tomorrow night always comes." "Not this one," said Fortinbras. "Not once in a blue moon or a month of Sundays." "It's not Guy Fawkes night," said Bod. "Or Halloween. It's not Christmas or New Year's Day." Fortinbras smiled, a huge smile that filled his pie-shaped, freckly face with joy. "None of them," he said. "This one's special." "What's it called?" asked Bod. "What happens tomorrow?" "It's the best day," said Fortinbras, and Bod was certain that he would have continued, but his grandmother, Louisa Bartleby, who was only 20, called him over to her and said something sharply in his ear. "Nothing," said Fortinbras. Then to Bod, "Sorry, I have to work now." And he took a rag and began to buff the side of his dusty coffin with it. "La, la, la, oomp," he sang. "La, la, la, oomp." And with each oomp he would do a wild, whole-body flourish with his rag. "Aren't you going to sing that song?" "What song?" "The one everybody's singing." "I've no time for that," said Fortinbras. "It's tomorrow. Tomorrow, after all." "No time," said Louisa, who had died in childbirth, giving birth to twins. "Be about your business." And in her sweet, clear voice she sang, "One and all we hear and stay, come and dance the macabre." Bod walked down to the crumbling little church. He slipped between the stones and into the crypt, where he sat and waited for Silas to return. He was cold, true, but the cold did not bother Bod, not really. The graveyard embraced him, and the dead do not mind the cold. His guardian returned in the small hours of the morning. He had a large plastic bag with him. "What's in there?" "Clothes. For you." "Try them on." Silas produced a gray sweater, the color of Bod's winding sheet, a pair of jeans, underwear, and shoes, pale green sneakers. "What are they for?" "You mean, apart from wearing?" "Well, firstly, I think you're old enough. What are you, 10 years old now? And normal living people clothes are wise. You'll have to wear them one day, so why not pick up the habit right now? And they could also be camouflage." "What's camouflage?" "When something looks enough like something else that people watching don't know what it is they're looking at." "Oh. I see. I think." Bod put the clothes on. The shoelaces gave him a little trouble, and Silas had to teach him how to tie them. It seemed remarkably complicated to Bod, and he had to tie and retie his laces several times before he had done it to Silas's satisfaction. Only then did Bod dare to ask his question. "Silas, What's a macabre? Silas's eyebrows raised and his head tipped to one side. Where did you hear about that? Everyone in the graveyard is talking about it. I think it's something that happens tomorrow night. What's a macabre? It's a dance, said Silas. All must dance the macabre, said Bod, remembering. Have you danced it? What kind of dance is it? His guardian looked at him with eyes like black pools and said, I do not know. I know many things, Bod, for I have been walking this earth at night for a very long time, but I do not know what it is like to dance the macabre. You must be alive or you must be dead to dance it. And I am neither. Bod shivered. He wanted to embrace his guardian, to hold him and tell him that he would never desert him, but the action was unthinkable. He could no more hug Silas than he could hold a moonbeam, not because his guardian was insubstantial, but because it would be wrong. There were people you could hug, and then there was Silas. His guardian inspected Bod thoughtfully, a boy in his new clothes. You'll do, he said. Now you look like you've lived outside the graveyard all your life. Bod smiled proudly. Then the smile stopped, and he looked grave once again. He said, But you'll always be here, Silas, won't you? And I won't ever have to leave if I don't want to? Everything in its season, said Silas, and he said no more that night. Bod woke early the next day, when the sun was a silver coin high in the gray winter sky. It was too easy to sleep through the hours of daylight, to spend all his winter in one long night and never see the sun. And so each night before he slept, he would promise himself that he would wake in daylight and leave the Owens' cozy tomb. Boy, do I understand that. The days go by way too fast in winter. There was a strange scent in the air, sharp and floral. Bod followed it up the hill to the Egyptian walk, where the winter ivy hung in green tumbles, an evergreen tangle that hid the mock Egyptian walls and statues and hieroglyphs. The perfume was heaviest there, and for a moment Bod wondered if snow might have fallen, for there were white clusters on the greenery. Bod examined a cluster more closely. It was made of several five-petaled flowers, and he had just put his head in to sniff the perfume when he heard footsteps coming up the path. Bod faded into the ivy and watched. 3 men and a woman, all alive, came up the path and into the Egyptian walk. The woman had an ornate chain around her neck. Is this it? She said. Yes, Mrs. Carraway, said one of the men, chubby and white-haired and short of breath. Like each of the men, he carried a large empty wicker basket. She seemed both vague and puzzled. Well, if you say so, she said, but I cannot say that I understand it. She looked up at the flowers. What do I do now? The smallest of the men reached into his wicker basket and brought out a tarnished pair of silver scissors. The scissors, Lady Mayoress, he said. She took the scissors from him and began to cut the clumps of blossom, and she and the 3 men started to fill the baskets with flowers. This is, said Mrs. Carraway, the Lady Mayoress, after a little while, perfectly ridiculous. It is, said the fat man, a tradition. Perfectly ridiculous, said Mrs. Carraway, but she continued to cut the white blossoms and drop them into the wicker baskets. When they had filled the first basket, she asked, Isn't that enough? We need to fill all 4 baskets, said the smaller man, and then distribute a flower to everyone in the old town. And what kind of tradition is that? Said Mrs. Carraway. I asked the Lord Mayor before me, and he said he'd never heard of it. Then she said, Do you get a feeling someone's watching us? What? Said the 3rd man, who had not spoken until now. He had a beard and a turban and 2 wicker baskets. Ghosts, you mean? I do not believe in ghosts. Not ghosts, said Mrs. Carraway, just a feeling like someone's looking. Bod fought the urge to push further back into the ivy. It's not surprising that the previous Lord Mayor did not know about this tradition, said the chubby man, whose basket was almost full. It's the first time the winter blossoms have bloomed in 80 years. The man with the beard and the turban, who did not believe in ghosts, was looking around him nervously. Everyone in the old town gets a flower, said the small man. Man, woman, and child. Then he said slowly, as if he were trying to remember something he had learned a very long time ago, 1 to leave and 1 to stay. And all to dance the macabre. Mrs. Carraway sniffed. Stuff and nonsense, she said, and kept on snipping the blossoms. Dusk fell early in the afternoon, and it was night by 4:30. Bod wandered the paths of the graveyard, looking for someone to talk to, but there was no one about. He walked down to the potter's field to see if Liza Hemstock was about, but found no one there. He went back to the Owens' tomb, but found it also deserted. Neither his father nor Mistress Owens was anywhere to be seen. Panic started then, a low-level panic. It was the first time in his 10 years that Bod could remember feeling abandoned in the place he had always thought of as his home. He ran down the hill to the old chapel where he waited for Silas. Silas did not come. Perhaps I missed him, thought Bod, but he did not believe this. He walked up the hill to the very top and looked out. The stars hung in the chilly sky while the patterned lights of the city spread below him, streetlights and car headlights and things in motion. He walked slowly down from the hill until he reached the graveyard's main gates, and he stopped there. He could hear music. Bod had listened to all kinds of music, the sweet chimes of the ice cream van, the songs that played on workmen's radios, the tunes that Clarity Jake played the dead on his dusty fiddle. But he had never heard anything like this before, a series of deep swells, like the music at the beginning of something, a prelude, perhaps, or an overture. He slipped through the locked gates, walked down the hill, and into the old town. "Again, buddy! What are you doing?" He passed the Lady Mayoress standing on a corner, and as he watched, she reached out and pinned a little white flower to the lapel of a passing businessman. "I don't make personal charitable donations," said the man. "I leave that to the office." "It's not for charity," said Mrs. Carraway. "It's a local tradition." "Ah," he said, and he pushed his chest out, displaying the little white flower to the world, and walked off, proud as punch. A young woman pushing a baby buggy was the next to go past. "What's it for?" she asked suspiciously as the mayoress approached. "One for you, and one for the little one," said the mayoress. She pinned the flower to the young man's winter coat. She stuck the flower for the baby to its coat with tape. "But what's it for?" asked the young woman. "It's an old town thing," said the Lady Mayoress vaguely. "Some sort of tradition." Bod walked on. Right. Bod walked on. Everywhere he went, he saw people wearing the white flowers. On the other street corners, he passed the men who had been with the Lady Mayoress, each man with a basket, handing out the white flowers. Not everyone took a flower, but most people did. The music was still playing, somewhere at the edge of perception, solemn and strange. Bod cocked his head to one side, trying to locate where it was coming from, without success. It was in the air and all around. It was playing in the flapping of the wings and awnings, in the rumble of distant traffic, the click of heels on the dry paving stones. And there was an oddness, thought Bod, as he watched the people heading home. They were walking in time to the music. The man with the beard and the turban was almost out of flowers. Bod walked over to him. "Excuse me," said Bod. The man started. "I did not see you," he said accusingly. "Sorry," said Bod. "Can I have a flower as well?" The man with the turban looked at Bod with suspicion. "Do you live around here?" he asked. "Oh, yes," said Bod. The man passed Bod a white flower. Bod took it, then said, "Ow!" as something stabbed into the base of his thumb. "You pin it to your coat," said the man. "Watch out for the pin." A bead of crimson was coming up on Bod's thumb. He sucked at it while the man pinned the flower to Bod's sweater. "I've never seen you around here," he told Bod. "I live here all right," said Bod. "What are the flowers for?" "It was a tradition in the old town," said the man, "before the city grew up around it. When the winter flowers bloom in the graveyard on the hill, they are cut and given out to everybody, man or woman, young or old, rich or poor." The music was louder now. Bob wondered if he could hear it better because he was wearing the flower. He could make out a beat, like distant drums, and a skirling, hesitant melody that made him want to pick up his heels and march in time with the sound. Bod had never walked anywhere as a sightseer before. He had forgotten the prohibitions on leaving the graveyard, forgotten that tonight in the graveyard on the hill the dead were no longer in their places. All that he thought of was the old town, and he trotted it down to the municipal gardens in front of the old town hall, which was now a museum and tourist information center, the town hall itself having moved into a much more imposing, if newer and duller, offices halfway across the city. There were already people around, wandering in the municipal gardens, now in midwinter, little more than a large grassy field with, here and there, some steps, a shrub, a statue. Bod listened to the music, entranced. There were people trickling into the square, in ones and twos, in families or alone. He had never seen so many living people at one time. There must have been hundreds of them, all of them breathing, each of them as alive as he was, each with a white flower. Is this what living people do? Thought Bod. But he knew that it was not that this, whatever it was special. The young woman he had seen earlier pushing a baby buggy stood beside him, holding her baby, swaying her head to the music. How long does the music go on for? Bod asked her, but she said nothing, just swayed and smiled. Bod did not think she smiled much normally, and only when he was certain that she had not heard him, that he had faded or was simply not someone she cared enough about to listen to, she said, "Blimmin' 'eck, it's like Christmases." She said it like a woman in a dream, as if she was seeing herself from the outside. In the same not-really-there tone of voice, she said, "Puts me in mind of me grand-sister, Aunt Clara. The night before Christmas, we'd go to her, after me gran passed away, and she'd play music on her old piano, and she'd sing sometimes, and we'd eat chocolates and nuts, and I can't remember any of the songs she sung, but that music, it's like all of them songs playing at once." The baby seemed to sleep with its head on her shoulder, but even the baby was swaying its hands gently in time to the music. And then the music stopped, and there was silence in the square, a muffled silence, like the silence of falling snow, all noise swallowed by the night and the bodies in the square, no one stamping or shuffling, scarcely even breathing. A clock began to strike somewhere close at hand, the chimes of midnight, and they came. They walked down the hill in a slow procession, all stepping gravely, all in time, filling the road, 5 abreast. Bod knew most of them. In the first row he recognized Mother Slaughter and Josiah Worthington, and the old Earl who had been wounded in the Crusades and came home to die, and Dr. Trefusis. All of them looking solemn and important. There were gasps from the people in the square. Someone began to cry, saying, "Lord, have mercy! It's a judgment on us, that's what it is!" Most of the people simply stared, as unsurprised as they would have been if this had happened in a dream. The dead walked on row, until they reached the square. Josiah Worthington walked up the steps until he reached Mrs. Carraway, the Lady Mayoress. He extended his arm and said, loud enough that the whole square could hear him, "Gracious lady, this I pray. Joy in me and the macabre." Mrs. Carraway hesitated. She glanced up at the man beside her for guidance. He wore a robe and pajamas and slippers, and he had a white flower pinned to the lapel of his robe. He smiled and nodded to Mrs. Carraway. "Of course," Mr. Carraway said. "Okay. Not everybody wants to hear your music." Okay. She reached out a hand. As her fingers touched Josiah Worthington's, the music began once more. "Oh, well, I'm sure it's not that music." If the music Bod had heard until then was a prelude, it was a prelude no longer. This was the music they had all come to hear, a melody that plucked at their feet and fingers. They took hands, the living with the dead, and they began to dance. Bod saw Mother Slaughter dancing with the man in the turban, while the businessman was dancing with Louisa Bartleby. Mistress Owens smiled at Bod as she took the hand of the old newspaper seller, and Mr. Owens reached out and took the hand of a small girl without condescension, and she took his hand as if she had been waiting to dance with him her whole life. Then Bod stopped looking because someone's hand had closed around his, and the dance began. Liza Hempstock grinned at him. "This is fine," she said, as they began to tread the steps of the dance together. Then she sang, to the tune of the dance, "Step and turn and walk and stay, now we dance the macabre." The music filled Bod's head and chest with a fierce joy, and his feet moved as if they knew the steps already, had known them forever. He danced with Liza Hempstock, and then, when that measure ended, he found his hand taken by Fortinbras Bartleby, and he danced with Fortinbras, stepping past lines of dancers, lines that parted as they came through. Bod saw Ebenezer Bolger dancing with Miss Barrows, his old former teacher. He saw the living dancing with the dead, and the one-on-one dances became long lines of people stepping together in unison, walking and kicking la 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 oomp, a line dance that had been ancient 1,000 years before. Now he was in the line beside Liza Hempstock. He said, "Where does the music come from?" She shrugged. "Who's making all this happen?" "It always happened," she told him. "The living may not remember, but we always do." And she broke off, excited. "Look!" Bod had never seen a real horse before, only in the pages of picture books, but the white horse that clopped down the street towards them was nothing like the horse that he had imagined. Oh, isn't this like the Gray Lady from like the first, I think it was like the first chapter. It was bigger by far, with a long, serious face. There was a woman riding on the horse's bare back, wearing a long gray dress that hung and gleamed beneath the December moon like cobwebs in the dew. She reached the square, and the horse stopped, and the woman in gray slipped off it easily and stood on the earth, facing them all, the living and the dead of them. She curtsied, and, as one, they bowed or curtsied in return, and the dance began anew. Now the lady on the gray leads us in the macabre, sang Liza Hemstock before the whirl of the dance took her off and away from Bod. They stomped to the music and stepped and spun and kicked, and the lady danced with them, stepping and spinning and kicking with enthusiasm. Even the white horse swayed its head and stepped and shifted to the music. The dance sped up, and the dancers with it. Bod was breathless, but he could not imagine the dance ever stopping. The macabre, the dance of the living and the dead, the dance with death. Bod was smiling, and everyone was smiling. He caught sight of the lady in the gray dress from time to time as he spun and stomped his way across the municipal gardens. Everyone, he thought. Everyone is dancing. He thought it, and as soon as he thought it, he realized that he was mistaken. In the shadows by the old town hall, a man was standing, dressed all in black. He was not dancing. He was watching them. Bod wondered if it was longing that he saw in Silas's face, or sorrow, or something else, but his guardian's face was unreadable. He called out, "Silas!" hoping to make his guardian come to them, to join the dance, to have the fun they were having, but when he heard his name, Silas stepped back into the shadows and was lost to sight. "Last dance!" someone called, and the music swirled up into something stately and slow and final. Each of the dancers took a partner, the living with the dead, each to each. Bod reached out his hand and found himself touching fingers with and gazing into the gray eyes of the lady in the cobweb dress. She smiled at him. "Hello, Bod," she said. "Hello," he said as he danced with her. "I don't know your name." "Names aren't really important," she said. "I love your horse. He's so big. I never knew horses could be that big." "He is gentle enough to bear the mightiest of you away on his broad back, and strong enough for the smallest of you as well." "Can I ride him?" asked Bod. "One day," she told him, and her cobweb skirts shimmered. "One day. Everybody does." "Promise?" "I promise." And with that, the dance was done. Bod bowed low to his dancing partner, and then, and only then, did he feel exhausted, feel as if he had been dancing for hour after hour. He could feel all his muscles aching and protesting. He was out of breath. A clock somewhere began to strike the hour, and Bod counted along with it. 12 chimes. He wondered if they had been dancing for 12 hours or 24 or for no time at all. A clock somewhere began to strike... sorry, I read that just now. I think she is. He straightened up and looked around him. The dead had gone, and the lady on the gray. Only the living remained, and they were beginning to make their way home, leaving the town square sleepily, stiffily, like people who had awakened from a deep sleep, walking without truly waking. The town square was covered with tiny white flowers. It looked as if there had been a wedding. Bod woke the next afternoon in the Owens' tomb, feeling like he knew a huge secret, that he had done something important, and was burning to talk about it. When Mistress Owens got up, Bod said, "That was amazing last night." Mistress Owens said, "Oh, yes?" "We danced," said Bod, "all of us, down in the old town." "Did we indeed?" said Mistress Owens with a snort. "Dancing, is it? And you know you aren't allowed down in the town." Bod knew better than even to try to talk to his mother when she was in this kind of mood. He slipped out of the tomb and into the gathering dusk. He walked up the hill to the black obelisk and Josiah Worthington's stone, where there was a natural amphitheater, and he could look out at the old town and at the lights of the city around it. Josiah Worthington was standing beside him. Bod said, "You began the dance, with the mayor. You danced with her." Josiah Worthington looked at him and said nothing. "You did," said Bod. Josiah Worthington said, "The dead and the living do not mingle, boy. We are no longer part of their world. They are no part of ours. If it happened that we danced the dance macabre with them, the dance of the dead, then we would not speak of it, and we certainly would not speak of it to the living. But I am one of you. Not yet, boy. Not for a lifetime. And Bod realized why he had danced as one of the living, and not as one of the crew that he had walked down the hill, not as one of the crew that had walked down the hill. And he said only, I see. I think. He went down the hill at a run, a 10-year-old boy in a hurry, going so fast he almost tripped over Digby Pool, 785 to 1860. As I am, so shall you be. Righting himself by effort of will, and charged down to the old chapel, scared he would miss Silas, that his guardian would already be gone by the time Bod got there. Bod sat down on the bench. There was a movement beside him, although he heard nothing move, and his guardian said, Good evening, Bod. You were there last night, said Bod. Don't try and say you weren't there or something, because I know you were there. Yes, said Silas. I danced with her. With the lady on the white horse. Did you? You saw it! You watched us! The living and the dead! We were dancing. Why won't anyone talk about it? Because there are mysteries. Because there are things that people are forbidden to speak about. Because there are things that they do not remember. But you're speaking about it right now. We're talking about the macabre. I have not danced it, said Silas. You saw it, though. Silas said only, I don't know what I saw. I danced with the lady, Silas, exclaimed Bod. His guardian looked almost heartbroken then, and Bod found himself scared, like a child who has woken a sleeping panther. But all Silas said was, This conversation is at an end. Bod might have said something. There were 100 things he wanted to say, unwise though it might have been to say them, when something distracted his attention, a rustling noise, soft and gentle, and a cold feather touch as something brushed his face. All thoughts of dancing were forgotten then, and his fear was replaced with delight and with awe. It was the 3rd time in his life that he had seen it. Look, Silas, it's snowing, he said, joy filling his chest and his head, leaving no room for anything else. It's really snow. So we're going to stop there, but we do have a picture on the next chapter, which will be the Convocation. And it's an interlude. It's not listed as another chapter. That's where we'll stop for this time. What'd you guys think? Oh, we are like more than halfway through this book. How did we do that? Look at that. Yeah, I know, it's weird. Like, no one will talk about it. I don't know. Something's gotta be up with that. Yeah. Really sweet. I did not like seeing, Ebenezer Boulder there. Or Ebenezer Bulger, rather. Of course. No time, and no problem. I'm happy to read it. I really, that scene was really creepy, at the pawn shop. Me too. I'm glad. I've said this probably a million times, but I love Neil Gaiman's writing. Some of the stuff we read here it doesn't cover the same subject matter at all, but it had me remembering bits of Stardust, which just has some, like, beautiful descriptions in it. Even though I've read it before, I kind of would like to, at some point, do Stardust, because I think it's just not as popular as it should be. It's just a beautiful book, and a beautiful story. Eventually this will just become a Neil Gaiman podcast. Or stream. Yeah, it's like, it's different, but it's really, both of them are really good. Neil Gaiman, I feel like, I guess he's someone who's, maybe from what I've heard, he sounds like he's pretty careful with his stuff and lending it for adaptation. And like every adaptation of his work that I've seen while it hasn't been exact to the source material, has been good, which is such a rarity in terms of adaptations. Usually they change things and it's just like, or they just don't do it right, and it's just, like, this is one where, like, yes, they do change things, but somehow they still make it work. And yes, the book is a separate element from the adaptation, but they're both good in their own right. Yeah, I really like The Witch too, Liza. I like that, like, she seemed this ominous figure that no one wanted him to go near and stuff, but ultimately she actually ended up being really kind of sweet and stuff. And she helped him. I'm glad that he was able to, like, make her a tombstone. I'm glad he brought the locket, or the brooch rather, back to the Sleer too, because I just had a bad feeling about it, like it was cursed or something. Right, no, she was a witch. She was just okay. She just got angry at one point. Understandable, I guess. And cursed a town. You know? Fair if they kill you, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if it was, like, about, like, it'll always reach us again, whether, like, you have to die for it to come back, or, like, somehow it will always find its way back here. I'm glad that he just brought it back. I don't know. I don't think that the Sleer itself is actually necessarily intending harm, but it is guarding. So it's like, don't mess with it. Yeah. Yeah, I know. What's it called? I think that they mentioned it, like, that it, something about avarice with it, which is, if I remember correctly, that's, like, a greed and stuff. I think it, like, causes that stuff in people. He's a bad, bad thing. Anyway, though, ooh, voice crack. Anyway, though, my voice is shot from having read. But I really enjoyed that. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about before we go? Anyway. Me too. I am also good. Me too. I'm glad that I got the chance to, like, properly give this a read. It's sad because, like, the other Gaiman books that I've read have been, like, I remember reading Stardust. When did I read Stardust? Was it in high school? Like, in the library at my school? Because, like, sometimes I'd go up there during lunch period and I'd read. Or was it college at some point? I don't remember. But, like, I did it during a time when I had school. And the same thing, well, Coraline was a little different. Coraline was shorter, so it was easier to get through. But, like, this came about at a time where I really didn't have the time to delve into it. So I'm glad that now I'm getting the chance to actually explore it. Yeah, me too, with Jack. I wonder about Jack. I wonder about, like, Silas. I mean, Jack is definitely coming back if you'll pardon the the funny rhyme. He is a hungry guy. I don't... Does he eat people? Like, I don't know. Yeah, and I'd like to find out his motives, too, of, like, why did he kill Bob's family in the first place? I guess we'll see. Yeah, he was talking about how, like, he had smelled something interesting, and then he, like, licked his lips, and he was like, and tasty, very tasty. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like self-motivated. Mm-hmm. I wonder where we're gonna go with that. Mm-hmm. I hope that, Bod stays in the graveyard now. No problem. Well, thank you guys for coming in and watching and listening and reading. If you'd like to check out, we'll be back next week at 5 o'clock on Sunday. But if you'd like to check out previous episodes of Quoth the Author, you can go ahead and... I worry about that too. You can go ahead and check out our YouTube channel, which is the same username as we have here. Sky Destiny over on YouTube. You can go ahead, like, comment, subscribe. If you have anything that you would like to be just immortalized in time, any comments, any questions that you want answered, that is the place to do it. So go ahead and do that there. Once again, we'll be back next Sunday at 5 o'clock. But as of right now, that'll be all. This has been Sky. Bye-bye!